Hello, and endings are hard, and also moving back into my office is hard. And sometimes I think to myself, "Oh, here's an idea for a video, and if I don't film this right now, this instant, I won't film it. I'll never figure out what I'm trying to say." So it's currently September. I had to check that fully. Like, what month is it? Let me just check my laptop, which is right here. That's what this is. Uh, it's currently September. This video is probably not getting posted until November. Roll with me. Endings are hard. And ironically, I didn't think of this video because I'm struggling with an ending. I mean, I'm always struggling with endings. But I actually thought of this video because I've been dissatisfied by a bunch of endings for stuff that I've read and watched and played recently. And it got me thinking about how actually endings are very difficult to craft. And basically, it's just sort of the whole point of this video is just processing and talking through the concept of why endings are so often dissatisfactory, and maybe how one who is a creative like me could think about endings to try and maybe solve some of those problems. I don't think it's going to be advice. I think fundamentally the big thing that everybody needs to understand about endings is that no matter what you do as a creative, you are always going to start more things than you finish, right? There are presumably those rare instances of people who don't have a life like that, who are just sort of casually able to do whatever aspects of it they want, like who literally do finish everything they start. Those people are very few and far between. So by and large, you are going to have much more experience starting stuff than you ever will finishing stuff. As a creative, that's just the standard, because most people are never going to finish everything they start, right? Even in other crafting endeavors that are not, writing, which is what I talk about here. Even in other crafting endeavors, a lot of the time you'll do things like when you're starting to learn how to crochet or knit or, cross stitch, you will try things and not finish them. You will learn to cast on, and you will cast on 20 more times than you'll ever cast off. Knitting. And crochet, actually, it's cast on and cast off there, isn't it? Because you have to start something to be able to finish it. You can't finish a thing you haven't started. And fundamentally, the likelihood is you're not going to finish everything you start. That's really normal. And therefore, everybody has less practice finishing things than they do starting them. Then on top of that, as if that wasn't enough by itself, on top of that, you also have the difficulty of the more dissatisfactory endings you come across, the harder it can be to come up with a satisfactory ending. In music, bear with me. In music, there are two categories of endings of a piece of music. There are two cadences, that's what it's called. There's perfect cadence and imperfect cadence. Perfect cadence is it sounds finished, and imperfect cadence is it's more abrupt. It often will make you go, oh, is that the end of the song? I'm sure saying that you've probably thought of a song that makes you do that, or thought of the experience of doing that about a song, even if you couldn't name the song, right? That's cadence in music. And I think that's really applicable to storytelling. Because I think sometimes we have this. So, what I would categorize as perfect cadence in storytelling, and by and large in books specifically, because that's what I talk about. By the way, if you don't know, I'm an author. And if this is coming out in November, then I have 7 books out. And if this comes out before November, then I have 6 books out and 1 on the way. And if you want to find out anything more about those, I have videos about them on my YouTube channel, but there's also links to my website in the description box right next to like and subscribe buttons if you already feel like sticking around because you think I'm doing a really good job. Anyway, the point is that when it comes to perfect cadence in storytelling or books, I would say by and large that is the hardest thing to find, right? Because perfect cadence in a story or a book, I feel like cannot include an epilogue. It has to be the end of the story itself, because an epilogue and a prologue, to my mind, are sort of like DLC content. Like, even though you get them as part and parcel of the main thing, it's like you're buying the deluxe edition of something. They're DLC content. Not everyone's going to interact with it. Not everybody reads prologues and epilogues, is what I'm saying. I've done a very convoluted way of explaining that, but not everybody reads prologues and epilogues. It's not like a main part of the story. It's additional content. So it has to be at the end of the story itself. No epilogues count. And I feel like perfect cadence, by and large, in a book, generally speaking, will be you close the book and you feel satisfied. And obviously that is a really, really like personal experience, isn't it? Because two different people can read the same book and one can leave it feeling satisfied and one can leave it not feeling satisfied. And I don't mean happy. I mean satisfied with the ending and the way that it rounds off the book, right? Where even if you have questions or thoughts, they're not ones that you feel like the writer did a bad job answering. It's as if you feel as if those questions are things you're meant to be left with, kind of, you know? Like, I know that the ending for Welcome to Humanity, for example, is emotionally charged. It is one that makes people feel very strongly. And also, by the feedback I've got so far, it is one that people are generally satisfied with. It doesn't leave plot questions open. You can see how the plot is closed at the end of the book. And that is primarily what I'm aiming for. That's what I consider to be perfect cadence, is that the plot is closed. So whatever your inciting incident or incidents were, those are closed in some capacity. It doesn't have to be completely closed. There's no questions. There's no possibility for continuation, obviously. Otherwise, you would never have a series ever. But something has to be closed, and closed in such a way that that it feels completed. So if I'm going to use Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse because it was my first book. It came out in 2021. It's my oldest book, and therefore it's the one that I use for these examples because it's the oldest book. I'll try and be vague and not do any spoilers, but basically when it comes to Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse, the thing that I knew I had to close, it was actually more than one thing. It was three things. I knew I had to close the romance because close the romance in a format, whether that is confession or lack of or like active decision not to confess. One of those things had to happen. It couldn't just be like, I have feelings for this person and I'm not going to do any thinking about them or do any acting about them. Nothing. I'm just going to stop thinking about it and not reference it ever again, right? You can't do that. Well, you can. I didn't want to do that. That wouldn't have closed it. It needed to either be a confession and follow on from that, or an active decision not to do any confession, an active decision to shut that down internally, right? Relationship potential open, relationship potential closed, one way or another. And there's still room to maneuver. It's not like you've gone through the door, closed the door behind you, and there's no doors in front of you. You're locked in a room now. There's another door in front of you. You can open another door, right? And then I knew that I had to close the door about Mary wanting to be a guardian in some which way. And again, it's not that that door is closed, there's nowhere to go. It's that the door, you've stepped through the doorway, the door is closed behind you. You can now, like in, I don't know if you've ever been to the zoo, but in a lot of the zoos, they have like the exhibits that you can walk through with the creatures, whatever they happen to be, bugs, lemurs, whatever, inside them. And often they have the 2-door system where you step through the door, you close the door behind you, you make sure there's no animals in the enclosure between the two, and then there's another door directly in front of you to get back out again. It's like that. There's a bunch of those. Each of these is like, people use doorways as a method, as a metaphor a lot in writing, but just this is the end of book closure. There is another potential door to open in front of you for the next book, and you can peek through that door a little bit or have that door propped ajar to entice people into the next book, but it can't be fully open, right? Because that's you opening another door, and that's not satisfactory. That's not a perfect cadence. And I'm not saying all books have to have perfect cadence, but just hear me out. I knew I had to close a door some which way about Merry's status within guardianship, because what Merry wants above and beyond everything else is to become part of the Brotherhood of Guardians, right? And then the third thing I knew I needed to close was the inciting incident itself, Raquel's curse. These were the three things I opened at the beginning of the book. These are the three things that I felt needed to be closed to allow for a feeling of satisfaction within the reader, to know that these doors are closed behind you. There is still an adventure that you could go on from here. Write the fanfiction, read the next book, you know? And it's not closing every single door. It's picking the big poignant ones. And this is where actually a lot of people fall down in general, but also particularly when it comes to long series. So when it comes to long series, like 5+ books, a lot of the time you get to the final book and you're expecting a lot from the ending. Now, there's a book series that I really like, and I've referenced it before in a Celebrate and Elevate way. I'm not doing that now because I'm about to tear its ending to absolute shreds. I'm so sorry. I genuinely love this book series. I think so much of it is done so well, and I think the final book in the series is absolute trash. I was so disappointed. And the reason I was so disappointed, and this is why it's relevant, and this is also why I'm not going to tell you which book it is, was because when you're writing a series of books, you open a lot of doors, right? You have all of these inciting incidents, you have all of these like ramping up moments. So, for example, I'm going to keep using the Guardian Cadet series because it's easier for me, and I'm actually only going to use Marilyn Breaking the Curse. I'm going to say that if I split those 3 plot points into 3 separate books, right? Imagine there's just one book about Raquel, and there's just one book about the romance, and there's just one book about, actually not even just one book about the romance. There's one book about Raquel's curse, one book about Merry joining the Guardians, one book about, like, if we break up the plot points, so like in the second half of the book, Merry's friends start being kidnapped. This is a thing that happens. And if you imagine, like, if we just split that first book into like 7 books, so each of those kidnappings is a whole book in and of itself. And the resolution isn't that we find out what happened to, like, resolution for Leor's kidnapping saga is finding out that people are being kidnapped. That's what's happened. Resolution for the next person, I'm not going to say who it is. So there are 3 people that get kidnapped. The second person is that we now know that this is, like, by the end of that, we now know that this is all related to Merry. By the time we get to the third person's kidnapping, that's when we get to the, like, oh my gosh, we know who the bad guy is. We know what's going on. We know where they're being kept. We've got to go and solve this problem. And then, so we got like 2 books, and then we got 3 kidnapping books, and then we got the final book, right? When it comes to closing out book 6 of this imaginary series that is actually just one book, you have to close all the doors you opened. Or at least you have to close all the really important doors. So if you got to the end of book 6 and you've kind of forgotten that Raquel had a curse in book 1, that's going to leave a reader feeling really unsatisfied. But also a lot of authors, because they're not stupid, know that you've got to amp this stuff up. You've got to ramp it up. You've got to make it more. You've got to make it bigger. And it's the Dragon Ball Z effect, which is a term in fandom. But the Dragon Ball Z effect is basically that if you've never watched it, you don't have to understand. You don't have to know anything about Dragon Ball Z. The main character's name is Goku. Goku is a fighter, like MMA style fighting. Just stick with me. I'm trying to make it simple. There are world-ending threats that come for Goku because he's an alien living on Earth. He thinks he's a human. He's not. And he realizes he's not. And there we go. Now he's not a human, and the world-ending threats just never stop. People keep trying to come and invade the planet. That's what's happening. And Goku fights them off. That's the premise of Dragon Ball. Each time the arc of a Dragon Ball, like, what's it called? Saga. That's not right. Season is that Goku exists. Aha. Somebody tries to invade the world. Goku tries to fight them off. Goku fails. Goku does training. Goku gets stronger. Goku fights them off. Usually they join his team. That's how Dragon Ball works. The thing is that Goku's arcs, they're exactly the same every time. It's the biggest threat he's ever faced. He gets some kind of power up. He defeats the enemy. Usually they join his team, sometimes they don't. Next season, he fights a world-ending threat that is stronger than he's ever been. He does some training, he gets a power up, and he fights the enemy. And there's another term for it, but I really just like calling it the Dragon Ball Z effect. Or the Dragon Ball effect. It's don't worry about it. And I think that problem happens a lot with long book series as well, is that you have these, like, especially with if there is a physical fight involved in it, which I read a lot of books with physical fights because I enjoy reading books with physical fights. So you get to the point and then there's these quite long-winded battle scenes by the time you get to the final book, because you've had like battle scenes that are a chapter or two or maybe three, and then because they're getting ramped up and it's like more people and more danger and more people and more danger and more people and more danger, by the time you get to the last one, like half the book is the final fight, and it's quite, I don't want to say boring, but I'm going to say boring, to read that much of a fight. It's like when smut scenes last for more than, I mean, again, personal preference, blah, blah, blah. But it's like when smut scenes last for more than like 2 or 3 chapters. I think a lot of the time it becomes, oh, okay, we're just going through the mechanics now. What's the point? And I think you do lose a lot of that emotional connection to the characters, but also, especially if you've had any experience with, well, since I brought up smut too, any experience with fighting or sex, you know that, like, about how long these things typically can last, right? And like, I'm not saying you couldn't spar for several hours straight. I'm not saying you couldn't do that. I am saying, by and large, if you have any experience fist fighting, they're quite short bouts. You don't want to be fist fighting for a long time. You don't want to be physically fighting a person. I did martial arts. You don't want to be physically fighting a person for a long time because it's very, very intensive and it's very, very tiring. So especially if you've got any experience like that coming to the page with you, when you're reading these ridiculously long fight scenes, you're sort of there like, wow, they've got a lot of stamina. Not sure that's realistic. And it begins to wear on your suspension of disbelief, right? And like, there's a certain amount of, you just have to accept that not everybody knows the things that you know, and not everybody has the things that you bring to the table. Like, I am a very eclectic sort of person. I know a lot about hair, I know a lot about fighting, I know a lot about chronic illness, I know a lot about like lots of weird and seemingly unconnected pieces. I know a lot about music, you know, like, and I see things and I look at them and I have to just shrug it off and be there like, I understand that the author does not have my experience, my context for this particular thing that they're doing. So even though I'm looking at it going, that's just not possible, or that's just not reasonable, they don't know that. But when it comes to the ends of these really long series, a lot of the time you get these massive fight scenes, or you get this power up effect where each of the big climactic moments in these previous books has been bigger and bigger and bossier than before. And then by the time you get to the final book, you are suffering from reader fatigue at this constant power up. A way to solve this, by the way, if you don't know, is to change the style of enemy that they're facing. So, for example, book 1, you face a fighty enemy. Book 2, you face an enemy that requires you to work as part of a team. Book 3, you face an enemy who is like very emotionally charged. They're going to get you with your emotions, not so much with your like physical fighty fights. Book 4, you're going to have to figure out your smarts. It's a puzzling enemy. Do you see what I mean? Like, there's lots of different ways to format an enemy. And then by and large, as a satisfactory thing for a reader, when you get to the final book, it's really nice to loop back around to whatever it was you started with, right? If your first enemy situation in the book series was a physical fight that beat them, loop back around to that in the final book. especially if you've veered away from it for a while, because A, your characters aren't used to it anymore, B, your readers aren't used to it anymore, and C, it is nostalgic for your reader to get back to that original format, that original feeling, right? Not that this is advice. Just sharing my own thoughts about it. Some of the other problems that keep coming up with endings for me is that an imperfect cadence is not by itself a bad thing. It's not a negative thing by and of itself. Sometimes an imperfect cadence for a piece of music or for a book can be really like the most appropriate choice, right? It can be the right choice. I'm not trying to pretend that every book ever should always have perfect cadence. Sometimes you want to get to the end of a book, especially if it's in a series, but even if it's not, and leave your readers going, oh my God, what? Like, that's not in itself bad. There are, however, lots and lots of ways to do it badly. And I think that some of the ways that it gets done badly include things like just no falling action, which I don't think is a great choice, because one of the big things that falling action offers your reader is a gentle exit from the world you have created. Like, most authors, myself included, really want to fully capture people's attention when we get them to read our books, right? I don't want you to be able to look up from the page. I want you to be so enraptured by it. Like, there's this series of books I've been reading. Stuffer, I'll tell you what they are. Consort of Fire is the first one. I can't remember what the series title is. Consort of Fire, Queen of Dreams, Daughter of Tides by Kit Rusher, right? I've been reading those recently, and I find those books I like them a lot. I find those books I like them, is what I'm saying. Every single time we get to the tippy top of the rising action, we get to the climactic moment of the book, the 75% mark, more or less. It's pretty much always a 75% mark as well. It's very well crafted, very well structured. I have hair in my mouth, I'm so sorry. Every single time we get there, it is basically, we get to the point, me and my partner, we read them to each other, and we'll get to like a point near there, and like, especially if we're reading on e-readers and stuff, we'll get to a point near there and we're there like, right, we have to stop here now, because I know that we cannot spend all night reading the rest of this book. And the other one of us be like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? And it's that every single book of it, and it's only been 3, but like every single book of it, we've been there, like, we get to that 75% mark, the rising action has reached its climactic moment, the start of the climax of the book has begun, and we just blast through to the end of the book, right? That's just how it works. That's how it goes. Can't put it down, right? That's the dream as an author. That's really what you want to hear. Oh, I couldn't put it down is the absolute best thing. I couldn't put it down, or I reread it, or I like recommended it to all of my friends and family. All of these things, the dream. But anyway, the point of that is that when you get to the end of that moment where your reader just hasn't been able to put it down, they just haven't been able to step away from it, it's not that you owe them a soft exit, it's that it's kind to offer a softer exit. So instead of, I couldn't put it down, from that 75% mark, I just haven't been able to stop, I blasted through the next 2 hours of reading, and then I was exhausted for work the next day. It is kind to offer a soft reprieve from that by allowing your characters to have falling action, right? Allowing your characters to figure out what their new normal looks like. Even just a little bit. Even if it's just like healing up after a fight or whatever. Just a little bit that allows your reader to go, oh, okay, the fight is over. I've been inside these emotions for a long time, but now the fight is over and we can all relax and go on with our new normal, right? And then as a reader, you can step out of that and you feel less like empty. Which is, again, not to say that imperfect cadence is never a good choice or never the right choice. I just think it's a delicate balance is what I'm saying. I think the other thing when it comes to imperfect cadence in books is that a lot of the time what we're getting in publishing, it's a relatively recent trend in publishing, and I hate it so much, is instead of having falling action, what you get is the inciting incident from the next book just pasted into the end of the first book. So I'm going to use the Guardian Cadet series again. Imagine for a moment we have this thing and the kidnappings and blah 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 blah, big fight, and then where I previously in the actual thing have been closing. Did I do the doors thing in this? I hope so, because if not, this is going to make no sense. I did have to refilm this video because I have a lot of pets and some of them need attention sometimes. But I hope the door thing makes sense, because I can't remember if it was in this version of the video or in the previous version of the video. But basically, if I haven't said it, you open doors. Like I like to imagine it as there's a series of doors to walk through. You open a door at the beginning of a book, and you should close that door behind the reader when they've stepped through it by the end of the book. That's like resolution. So when it comes to Mary Ellen Breaking the Curse, you have these three things. You have Raquel's Curse, you've got the romance, you've got Mary Wants to Be a Guardian. It's like, instead of closing those three doors at the end of the book, I decided instead to take the first chapter, or the first couple of chapters of Mary Ellen Finding the Heir, which is the second book, and just bonk them on. So instead of like, there's a conversation with Commander Wickley wherein Mary's like, yeah, so how are we going to solve this inciting incident, by the way? Because I have a solution, but it's terrible. And Commander Wickley is like, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. You'll never guess what happens. Instead of that conversation, which is to do with the inciting incident from the very beginning of the book, I would take the conversation Mary has with Commander Wickley about we need to travel to the Elven Isles. I'm not saying any more than that. And I'd put that as part of the fallout of this book, to be fair. I'd put that there where that conversation about the inciting incident had been. So you lose that resolution for the inciting incident, and instead you get this opening of the next book, and then the book ends. And it's like, that's not pleasant as a reader. I recognise that for a lot of people it's gripping enough, and marketing does this, right? It's a marketing gimmick. Sorry. But marketing does this, where if it leaves you dissatisfied, you're more likely to seek out more of it because you want to feel that satisfaction, right? Like when a video thumbnail doesn't actually exist within the video itself, and you don't get the hit of, like, it's essentially pattern recognition in the thumbnail case. But somebody, I think Anne Reardon from How to Cook That, did a really great video about it. It was yonks ago though, so I've got no idea. Good luck if you want to find that. But yeah, and it's that thing of like, instead of having the resolution that is quite pleasant for your reader, you end up with this new start, which is quite jarring for a lot of people, and it leaves people feeling like nothing has been resolved, and therefore some people will be really gripped and want to read the next book, right? And other people will be really kind of insulted or feel quite betrayed by it, and will therefore never read anything you write ever again. Me and my wife are some of these people. It doesn't matter how good the book was either. If it does that, if it just sets up for the next book, no resolution for the first book. And like, again, I don't like to name and shame, but I have just sung their praises. I do feel like Daughter of Tides did that a little bit, and it's not enough to make me feel like there was no resolution. There was definitely some resolution, but it did feel like half a book rather than a whole book. And I feel like Joy DeMora's Hunger Pangs, she freely admits, Joy DeMora, that the original draft of Hunger Pangs series was a gazillion words long. I can't remember how many words it was exactly, but it's a lot of words. And she ended up splitting that draft into smaller pieces and is working on bringing them out. She brought out the first one. She's working on bringing out book 2. And she freely admits that it is a bigger series that got chopped up into smaller pieces, right? It literally is that. And that doesn't do this. The only thing at the end of Hunger Pangs True Love Bites, the first book, that follows that setup pattern is that at the end of it, there is set up for a relationship that isn't really fleshed out enough within the context of the book itself. But I also recognize, as a reader and a writer both, that the reason that's in there is to make it clear from book one that this is going to be a polyamorous romance, right? It's so that you don't get through book one thinking that it's just going to be Nathan and Vlad together and Ursula's kind of there. No, it's a triad. They're all in a relationship together. And like, so I can completely see why that feels a bit tacked on at the end of that book, because I don't think it's going to be for the rest of them, but she had to find a way to make sure that was clear in book one. Do I think it's necessarily the most elegant? That's neither here nor there. I think she does a great job with everything else, so that's one little tiny flaw that really doesn't, to me, affect the bigger picture. Which is why it's not a name and shame. It's still a celebrate and elevate. I think it's an excellent book and I highly recommend it. I also think the Kit Rosher books are excellent. I highly recommend them too. They're all polyamorous books I've talked about here apart from mine. Well, not all. Some of mine are polyamorous books and some of mine are not polyamorous books. That's some of the fun. Anyway, the point is that the other thing that I think that pops up a lot with endings, other than this setting up for the next book, which I think is a betrayal of your reader's trust. I think the other thing that a lot of endings, and this isn't so much of a problem anymore, it was more of a problem in, I want to say, the early 2000s, was when you got to the end, especially the end of a long series, and you suddenly got an epilogue that's set like 20 years in the future, showing how happy and cis heteronormative their lives look now. And it's like, I think if there was a particularly egregious one, and it's not actually in a series that I read, but again, no naming and shaming, it was a particularly popular series. Please don't try and guess. I always say that. Please don't try and guess what I'm not naming and shaming. But there was a particularly popular series, and there was like themes within it of like generational fighting, basically. So like, the previous generation has a fight, the next generation has a fight, and the implication is that it ends there and the subsequent generation doesn't have the fight, right? But they don't, and like that's, I presume that's what the epilogue was supposed to show, right? Was that, hey, look at these kids of the middle generation. Look at how they don't have to do this. But look at how all of their parents are still alive, I guess. But it doesn't actually show that this situation isn't going to be perpetuated any further, because it only shows these kids as kids, and most of the fighting happens when they're a little bit older anyway. So like, but also it was a real like slap in the face to a lot of people because of a lot of reasons. Like there were so many problems with that epilogue, but like you could see the purpose of it with a little bit of investigation, but it didn't actually achieve its purpose. And I find that people do that a lot with epilogues at the end of long series, is that they're there like, it's difficult to close off the book, right? It's difficult to figure out where to end the falling action, and you kind of want to make the point that like, hey, by the way, reader, these characters, they're happy now. I promise. You've been through so much with them, and look how happy they are now. 10, 5, 20 years from then. And you know a book that does it really well? It's actually, a book that does it really, really well is, what's it called? It's the Taming Demons series. I think that's what it's called. It's a Guild Codex world specific piece of it, right? So Annette Marie has written a series of books, Guild Codex books. There is the main Guild Codex series that starts with 3 Mages and a Margarita, and there are 3 like additional series. And the first additional series that got added on was Taming Demons. Starts with Taming Demons for Beginners, I think is the first one. That's a 4-book series. At the end of those 4 books, very specifically, their epilogue is so well done, because at the end of those 4 books, and I'm not going to give you any spoilers, don't you worry. At the end of those 4 books, you see the way that the character was in the beginning, right? At the very beginning, the main character, who has a name. If only I could remember what it was. That's quite bad, isn't it? I'm so sorry. I'm really bad with names in general, actually. If you've ever met me and then you meet me again and I don't remember you, I'm so sorry. I'm terribly face blind and terribly bad at remembering names. Anyway, the main character, who has a name, is a bookworm at the very beginning, and over the course of these 4 books, her world gets turned upside down, as worlds generally do in good books. But at the end of it, all of the stuff that she'd been reading about in her books at the beginning, she is now pursuing, right, with her love interest. And again, I'm not doing any point. And it's a really beautiful piece, because it's like, at the very beginning, her parents have just died, right? She's an adult, but her parents have just died, and she is feeling massive amounts of grief. She is thrown in over her head in a world she doesn't really understand, and she's always been a massive bookworm, and she's got this internal desire for adventure that is absolutely quashed completely by terror, right? She is afraid of everything. So when you get to the epilogue of the book and you see climactic moment and there's some falling action, and then you get this epilogue where she's out in the world doing exciting things, it becomes this really joyful experience of, hey, she got to be where she wanted to be. And you can see how it follows on from the story that came before it. It's not jarring. It's a logical conclusion, and it's one you wouldn't necessarily have been able to see in the traditional falling action, because it is a little while after. There's a bit too much of a time gap between the end of the narrative and this epilogue for it to be anything but an epilogue. So, much like I've only got 2 epilogues so far in all of my books. And epilogue number 1 is in they're both in Not That Kind of Dandy. The first one is in Not the Fighting Kind, and the second one's in Not the Fainting Kind, because those are the 2 pieces of Not That Kind of Dandy. In Not the Fighting Kind's epilogue, so in the first book's epilogue, that is, oh my gosh, a year after the events of the book, right? And it is partly an epilogue to be there, look at how far this character can go from the end of the book to now, well, to 1 year from then. And it is partly set up for the next book, which I already had a release date for when I was bringing out the first book, right? I already had it all written. It was ready to go. Even if I had been hit by a bus the very next day, it could still have happened. It was on pre-order. It was available. It was ready to go. There was no way that people were not going to get their copies of Not the Fainting Kind. And when it comes to the epilogue of the second book in the series, again, it's the thing of, it's been a little while. Look how these characters are managing their lives now. And that is the way, in my opinion, to do an epilogue without making your readers feel oh gosh, that's so jarring. I didn't expect these things to happen. Or this is a ship that wasn't made canon in the story itself, but now it's canon in the epilogue. I don't understand why that's a thing, and why is it that everybody in the story has the exact same situation in the epilogue? How is it, again, for this one specific one where everybody's got kids, how is it that every single one of them has a child that's exactly the same age? Tell me this, how does that work? That doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't align with the way the characters have been built out thus far in the narrative. And also, by the way, what happened to all of this character over here's growth? How exactly are they back to being exactly the same as they were in book 1 in the epilogue? That doesn't make any sense either. I know it's been 10 years, 20 years, whatever. I have no idea how long it's been. I know it's been 10 years, 20 years. And it's the problem with making an epilogue that... My hair got stuck in my glasses. It's the problem with making an epilogue that is too far outside the story itself, right? I think if you're going over 5 years, it's probably too long, and maybe you shouldn't. And, actually, just as an aside, I think that's also the case with prologues. If your prologue is when the character was a baby, or 3,000 years ago when the world began, or, you know, something like that. I don't think that needs to be there, in my humble opinion. I think that's too far. I don't think that's reasonable. I think that's too far outside the realm of what is a reasonable length of time within the story. Unless one of your characters has existed for that entire time and it's their point of view, like say you've got a vampire. I'm writing a vampire book right now, that's why I'm thinking about vampires. Say you've got a vampire who was alive during the prologue and it's from their point of view, and now they're a side character or the love interest or something in the main story. I feel like that's okay because there's a direct link. That's it, the direct link. And it's like, you might be there like, but Will, you just said if the main character's a baby, it doesn't count either. Yeah, I don't think it should count if the character's a baby, because then you have the main character. That's just a flashback. Like, that's just a flashback or a story that somebody else can tell about when this character was a baby. Like, I don't think it should be a prologue. Anyway, that's a separate issue. I've been talking for 40 minutes and I've come to no conclusions about endings. Yeah. Because endings are hard. So, in keeping with the theme of this video, I'm going to end things here. What's that? Imperfect cadence, you say? Yes, I'm going to end things here. Possibly, I brought a book out recently. Possibly, it's coming out soon. I'm not exactly sure when this video is going up. If you want information about it, check out my website. The links are in the description box below, right next to the like and subscribe button, if you feel like sticking around. I will see you in 2 weeks' time, probably, unless this ends up coming out in December. In which case, I guess I'll see you in January. Bye!